I know Joe's answer was really lame, but
welcome to the One Accord Podcast. I'm Joe. He's Eric. That's Greg. We took a week off, but we're back to continue in our biblical theology project, and we are right in the thick of the book of Genesis. We started our podcast many weeks ago, probably over a year ago now, that we started talking about systematic issues, and we don't all read the Bible exactly the same, even though we all take the Bible very seriously. All three of us are committed Christians. We believe that the Bible is the Word of God. We want to submit to its authority and under the Lordship of Jesus Christ. But even though we share those commitments, when we read the text, sometimes we have disagreements. And so we are continuing through the Bible, reading it together, talking about things that kind of pop out to us. We can't talk about everything, but if you're watching this, we'd love to hear your comments in the comment section below about things that stand out to you from these chapters. But today on the sheet, we're looking for Genesis 39, 40, and 41, talking about the life of Joseph. But before we dive into it, I haven't seen you guys in a little while. So, Eric, how you been doing?
hey, I've been hanging in there. Missed you guys last week. My weeks are never the same when the podcast doesn't happen.
I know you said this is
better or worse.
He said this is one of his favorite things.
It's a double-edged sword.
He realized he didn't actually like it all that much, and he's sorry to be back. No,
my weeks are not as good when the podcast doesn't happen. So I really look forward to these.
Wow. Well, Greg, good to see you. Did you enjoy your time off, or were you, in a cold sweat, missing us so bad? And now your life is finally complete now that we're back together again.
Yeah.
Those are pretty extreme.
Those are like, options. Can I pick anywhere in between there?
You can. Yeah.
Okay, excellent. No, yeah. I think I was telling you guys before we started, before we hit the record button, I haven't really felt well since Thanksgiving, and really got sick right after Christmas. And so, man, it just all I want for Christmas is to feel well again. So good time. It was nice to be off. It was nice to not have to try to not cough as we're recording, but it is good to be back. And so ready to argue viciously for whatever it is I believe out of these three chapters.
Well, I am sorry that you're not feeling well. If that's all you want for Christmas, I mean, we're like 12 months away from Christmas at this point.
Yes, I know. I'd be willing to take that for next Christmas. I'm going to borrow against tomorrow. So
fair enough. Well, I am eagerly anticipating hearing whatever it is that you're viciously defending for whatever it is you believe. That's one of the strangest descriptions I've ever heard, but I'm on the edge of my seat. So why don't we go ahead?
Me too.
There we go. Why don't we go ahead and read Genesis 39, and then we'll dive right in.
Now Joseph had been taken down to Egypt, and Potiphar, an Egyptian officer of Pharaoh, the captain of the bodyguard, bought him from the Ishmaelites who had taken him down there. The Lord was with Joseph, so he became a successful man, and he was in the house of his master, the Egyptian. Now his master saw that the Lord was with him, and how the Lord caused all that he did to prosper in his hand. So Joseph found favor in his sight and became his personal servant, and he made him overseer over his house, and all that he owned he put in his charge. It came about that from the time he made him overseer in his house and over all that he owned, the Lord blessed the Egyptian's house on account of Joseph. Thus the Lord's blessing was upon all that he owned, in the house and in the field. So he left everything he owned in Joseph's charge, and with him there he did not concern himself with anything except the food which he ate. Now Joseph was handsome in form and appearance. It came about after these events that his master's wife looked with desire at Joseph, and she said, "Lie with me." But he refused, and said to his master's wife, "Behold with me here. My master does not concern himself with anything in the house, and he has put all that he owns in my charge. There is no one greater in this house than I, and he has withheld nothing from me except you, because you are his wife. How then could I do this great evil and sin against God?" As she spoke to Joseph day after day, he did not listen to her to lie beside her or be with her. Now it happened one day that he went into the house to do his work, and none of the men of the household was there inside. She caught him by his garment, saying, "Lie with me." And he left his garment in her hand and fled and went outside. When she saw that he had left his garment in her hand and had fled outside, she called to the men of her household and said to them, "See, he has brought in a Hebrew to us to make sport of us. He came in to me to lie with me, and I screamed. When he heard that I raised my voice and screamed, he left his garment beside me and fled and went outside. So she left his garment beside her until his master came home. Then she spoke to him with these words, "The Hebrew slave, whom you brought to us, came in to me to make sport of me. And as I raised my voice and screamed, he left his garment beside me and fled outside." Now when his master heard the words of his wife, which she spoke to him, saying, "This is what your slave did to me," his anger burned. So Joseph's master took him and put him into the jail, the place where the king's prisoners were confined, and he was there in the jail. But the Lord was with Joseph and extended kindness to him and gave him favor in the sight of the chief jailer. The chief jailer committed to Joseph's charge all the prisoners who were in the jail, so that whatever was done there, he was responsible for it. The chief jailer did not supervise anything under Joseph's charge because the Lord was with him, and whatever he did, the Lord made to prosper.
Well, brothers, as we talk about Genesis 39, the text says of Joseph that the Lord was with him after he ends up in the house of Potiphar. What does that mean?
Yeah, that is a really interesting phrase. This is not the only time we see it in Scripture. It's found a few other places. Now, I can say that it doesn't mean that God was in close proximity to Joseph. I think we're making a mistake if we take it too literally. If we assume this means that God was like in the room with Joseph at the time. I don't think anyone takes it that way anyway. I think the meaning is that God just caused Joseph to be successful in all that he did, or as verse 3 says, the Lord caused all that he did to prosper in his hand. So it seems like if God is with somebody, that means that person has God's favor. God is working through them and empowering them to be successful and to prosper in all that they do. So you want God to be with you. If God is with you, then you're going to do very well. And so all of us should want that.
Yeah, fair enough. I don't disagree with any of that. It's funny, you read the Bible and some things stand out to one person, other things stand out to another. This is one of those phrases that until I had the question before me, I went, I don't know, I guess I kind of just took it for granted, right? And so if I had to put some sort of definition on this, the recognition of success, the recognition of being blessed, of being profitable, of being accomplished in whatever it is you're setting your hand on, but with the recognition that it was God who brought about that success is how I would probably want to define that. So the emphasis being on God, but what we're emphasizing there is the success that Joseph enjoyed.
Certainly, this is tied to the prosperity. I think that that came through in Eric's answer, Greg. I'm hearing what you're saying, I think, loud and clear, and I'm with you guys 100% on that. The way I see it in Genesis 39, this phrase is actually repeated 4 times. So it's pretty clear that God has, I think, inspired us to really understand this. And it is linked to prosperity. However, that prosperity is, I don't know what the right word is, maybe tainted by the fact that he's, of course, been sold into slavery. That's the context of what this was. If people are watching this and didn't read the earlier chapters, or if this is your first episode, we talked about last time that Joseph, because he was seemingly favored in his own family by his dad, and he got this dream from the Lord, and his brother's response was they thought about killing him, and then they settled on selling him into slavery. So then you read about this prosperity, the Lord is with him, and I think it's very interesting at this point in the narrative that we're seeing this interplay between comfortable circumstances, what God is doing, how he's bringing about his will and activity, and for anybody who would be reading this, oh man, he's in slavery in Egypt in this foreigner's home and house. Has God forgotten him? Well, no, we're told 4 times in this chapter that the Lord was with him. The Lord was with him. The Lord was with him.
I think it's good that we also recognize what you had pointed out, Joe, that this would counter any claims to regional deities, right? In the mindset of the people then, Egypt would have been quite a ways away. Joseph wasn't walking back home. And so against any claim of regional sovereignty, here is Yahweh still with Joseph in Egypt, against, working counter to or working, outside of any sovereignty of the Egyptian gods.
I think that's a great point. And I know we've talked about that before. Eric, I think you were the one who brought up that it doesn't even seem clear. It seems like some of these people that we've been focusing on in these Toledots and the kind of this chosen lineage, even they didn't really fully understand the God that was calling them. They would steal household idols and other kinds of things, or they had to tell people to put away the household idols at certain times. And yet the narrator that's telling us this is explicitly against that idea that Yahweh is just another cultic regional deity. His sovereignty extends over everybody, and he is with Joseph even in this difficult place. And so the difficulty that Joseph is experiencing isn't because God is unable to deliver him, but it seems to be priming us that there's some resolution to this, that God is still at work and should be building that anticipation. Obviously, you guys know the biblical text well enough to know how this will turn out. But as we were reading this, if we're reading this for the first time, it seems like this should be really keeping us at attention. God is still doing something, and what's he going to do? It's building that anticipation, I think.
You said something interesting about how, like, Joseph's brothers didn't hinder God's plan. As a matter of fact, as we read the rest of the story, interestingly enough, what they did was part of the plan. And I know that requires a lot of unpacking, and we can't do that right now. We'll have to wait until we get to certain texts. But I love how this seemingly disastrous situation was actually the way in which God was bringing about a plan. And he was with Joseph in this miserable situation, and he was intending to bring good out of it all along. So it's like, you can feel miserable and you feel like your life's turned upside down and everything's going wrong, and yet God is with you and bringing about things that you could never otherwise see.
And not only in spite of, but through, right? Like, I don't know. I feel like often, at least our version of American Christianity wants to say, unless your circumstances are good, you're doing something wrong. You're not walking with God. You're not being obedient. But here, God is using this time of trial to accomplish. So it's not God's with him in spite of. It's God's with him because of, which is an interesting thing to try to properly apply to our situations in life.
I know I've heard a lot of sermons from like Romans 8, for example, when we're quoting about how God, causes all things to work together for good, and they'll rightly go to a passage like this, saying, okay, this is how God sometimes causes things to work together for good. And we'll see, the passage I think that you were alluding to, Eric, we'll see when we get there that Joseph himself makes that very same conclusion near the end. It's probably hard to see it in the middle, though. I do wonder sometimes what Joseph was thinking, when he's down in that pit, or when he's in the cart of the Ishmaelites being taken over there, when he's sold actually into Potiphar's house. And that's a good lead up into our next question. These advances that are being made by his new master's wife, Potiphar's wife, she's really trying to get his attention. We get another little piece of pearling, I think, in verse 6. It says that he was beautiful of form and face.
Yeah, now Joseph was handsome in form and
handsome
appearance.
in form, not beautiful in form. Sorry, handsome in form and appearance. So yes, it's good to not always paraphrase, but to actually read the thing. So that little detail is given to us for a reason, and Potiphar's wife clearly is noticing this detail that now is coming into focus for us. But is there anything that we could kind of learn from Joseph's conduct toward Potiphar's wife, especially in being holy and resisting sexual temptation, those kinds of things? What do you guys think about that?
Yeah, well, Joseph resists the sexual advances of Potiphar's wife, just to be more specific about what was going on. She was very attracted to him, and she was pursuing him. And in the midst of this, we read that Joseph remembered the favor that God had given him. Again, going back to what you said earlier, Joseph recognized this is God giving him this favor. It's not just accidental. And this caused him to basically recoil at the thought of betraying God. He thought, God allowed me to go into this miserable situation, but yet God is now giving me favor. Now I'm in charge of my master's house. How in the world could I betray the God who is giving me all this favor? So I think remembering God's goodness can help us resist temptation. If we just remember, look at all the good that God has done. Look at all the grace, the mercy, the blessings that come in various ways. If God has given me all these things, how in the world could I betray him by doing such a thing? So that's one thing to consider. Also, based on Joseph's quick reaction in verse 12, and as I read verse 12, I get the impression that when Potiphar's wife came on to him, it was like he just instantly took off. And so based on his reaction, it seems like he already had a plan in case Potiphar's wife threw herself at him. And so I think rather than letting our guard down, we should always be on the alert and prepared to act when temptation comes. We should have a plan, not that we can anticipate every individual temptation that comes, but we can make up our minds, okay, whenever temptation comes, let's say we're weak in a certain area. Okay, I'm going to be tempted to do whatever it is, fill in the blank. When this temptation comes, I'm going to have a plan in place, and I'm going to act on it right away so that this can't, take hold of me. So I think that's what I've gathered from reading this. I think Joseph had a plan. He thought, okay, she's been doing this stuff over and over again. And so if this happens again and I'm in this desperate situation, I'm going to do this. I'm just going to bolt and not even give myself a chance to give into this temptation. So I think that's my guess as to what he did.
Yeah, at the risk of earning myself a demerit, which I would prefer if Eric did. But later in the Bible, we're going to read the instruction that Paul gives. Flee sexual immorality. I think, and we'll see this in Proverbs, so maybe that's 2 demerits. But the instruction for young men in particular, out of the text, seems to be flee, run away from. Don't stand there and try to endure. But run away when it comes to sexual immorality. I think it's biblical, so it's very good advice. We are weak creatures. Resist the devil, but run away when it comes to sexual immorality. I think is great.
I would add another thing that I don't recall you guys. Be curious to hear your perspective on this as well. But I'm not sure that Joseph really had an opportunity to have accountability. It says that he came in and there was no one else in the house. He's a servant in his master's household, so he didn't get to choose his own context. Most of us, though, when we're not servants, we don't have to do certain things. And so building in certain levels of accountability, it seems like Eric, you mentioned this, she was making these advances over and over. And this opportunity arose because there was nobody there, and then she could accuse him of something and lie about it, and he's going to have to deal with these consequences. He ends up going to jail. And so any Christian who wants to avoid temptation, praise God for that. Everything that we were talking about will help you avoid temptation. Joseph successfully avoided temptation. What he did not successfully avoid was the accusation. And when she became scorned, she accused him of doing something he didn't do. She, in fact, accused him like she didn't want what she wanted and that he wanted what he didn't want. And it stuck because there's nobody there to be an eyewitness for it. And so, we live in a land where you're supposed to be innocent until proven guilty. But I think we all know that's not actually true, especially in the mind of public opinion. Many people, if you're accused of something, they assume you did it. And so in order to avoid all of the situation that Joseph was in, everything you guys said, I'm in full agreement with. Try and flee. Don't try and stand. Just get away from those situations. If you know you're tempted in certain areas, make a plan, get away from it. But also having additional built-in accountability, especially with like men and women relationships or something like that, like not meeting alone where an accusation could be made. I think that's all... we're reading a little bit between the lines, but if somebody else was there, who knows? They might have still taken her side, right? But the fact that nobody else was there made it really, now it's her word against his. Who's Potiphar going to believe? His own wife or a slave? I mean, he's going to, this isn't going to go well for Joseph. And if you're in ministry or you're just a Christian, again, you don't want to be accused of stuff. So having other people around who could be able to attest for your character, I think is a pretty important thing. As much as possible. So you guys think that that's a crazy application to get from this as well, or I didn't hear you guys talking about that. Maybe I missed it, but I would add that for your consideration. Yeah,
no, I mean, if Potiphar had been around, this wouldn't have happened. If she hadn't kind of lied in wait for this opportunity, as I read the text, she was waiting for this opportunity to be alone, maybe not to accuse him, but under the idea that being alone would offer her better opportunity than in front of a house full of other people. So yeah, absolutely. I mean, and what Christian, if you're willing to be honest with yourself, there are things that we all struggle with, right? But when you're surrounded by other Christians, you feel the eyes of other Christians on you, and the temptation of whatever temptations you're facing feel less powerful as you're being held accountable by brothers and sisters in Christ who hold. Whereas if you're surrounded by unbelievers who have no moral, ethical, theological problem with whatever it is you're being tempted into, you feel more at liberty there. So I think your point about surrounding yourself as much as you can with good accountability. I know pastors who, as their children get older, like they travel with their son everywhere they go. Their son is their secretary or whatever word they want to use there. If you always have you as a man always have your teenage son with you, there is a built-in defense against foolish behavior there.
Yeah, those are really good points. I agree with all that. And having people around, especially like, in certain, if a man is talking to a woman, in a private setting, there's danger there.
I'm even thinking like foul language, right? Like, I say this, I grew up on the flight line. I grew up in the Air Force where cuss words were our nicknames. And the worse the cuss word, the more your boss liked you. That was me. And so, as much as I don't want to, it's still there, and I fight against it. Now, if I'm surrounded with a bunch of people who are all cursing and swearing, it's a lot easier for me to just fall back into those habits that literally I grew up with, matured with. Whereas if I'm surrounded by Christians, the temptation to do that is much, much, much less.
Sure. Yeah, and I think it's interesting. You can put this to the test because you can go to for example, a Bible study where there's a group of Christians sitting around a table, and whatever temptation you struggle with, I can pretty much guarantee that that temptation is not going to be a temptation, or at least not nearly as much when you're sitting around the table with believers. I know for myself, that was always the case, and although there was one temptation that was an exception, and that was a temptation to talk too much. And so I used to blabber on and on.
I can't relate to that one at all.
Yeah, I can't imagine. I can't imagine either of you guys struggling with that.
Yeah. So anyway, those are my 2 cents.
Now I'm feeling the temptation to give Greg a salty nickname. I'm just kidding. Well,
it wouldn't be my first.
Yeah, as you just shared. Well, moving on, it is interesting, as we think about, obviously we all are aware that Christians can fail and fall. As we're reading this narrative, Joseph is again being described as this really, I don't know, in many ways an exemplary figure. We've seen others like Judah was seeking out sexual immorality. Now Joseph is resisting it, and yet the consequences for him are very negative. He ends up in jail, and yet we're reminded, again in verse 21, for example, that God gave him favor in the sight of the chief jailer. Any idea how this would have looked or worked out? Because again, most people, as you're reading this, you think, well, you're in jail. That sure doesn't sound like favor. But now he's going to get a little extra responsibility from this. What exactly is going on here? How do you read this description?
Well, I think God must have caused the jailer to view Joseph in a favorable way. In other words, I think God probably changed his disposition toward Joseph. And then as a result, the jailer put Joseph in charge of the prisoners. I don't think it was, it would make no sense for it to be the other way around. He probably didn't immediately, put him in a position of authority and then he gained favor afterwards. That wouldn't really make any sense. God probably just, changed the jailer's view of him, or changed his disposition toward him, and that caused him to put Joseph in this position. So I believe God has the power to change people's hearts toward others. Actually, we will, in not too long a time, we'll read about that again in the book of Exodus in a really interesting way. I won't give away any details. But earlier, we saw that God changed Esau's heart toward Jacob. Esau went from wanting to kill Jacob in Genesis 27:41 to reconciling with him in Genesis 33. So I think, God has the power to change people's hearts. And I think this is a case where God just stepped in and just simply changed the jailer's heart toward Joseph. That's my best guess from what I can gather from the text.
Yeah, I'm not going to disagree with you in substance, but I will say that I would want to be careful, just because there's a lot of charged language that you're using there. Change the jailer's heart. I think it's possible that this could just be that God opened the jailer's eyes to the reality of Joseph's worth, his value, his hard work ethic, his responsibility, without using language like he changed the jailer's heart. And again, not disagreeing in substance, only opening that can of worms. Someone's going to want to take that further than maybe you mean it. Maybe you mean a converted heart, the way we would talk about that.
No, I don't mean that.
So that's where I would just say, like, here's one of those examples where I believe that the Holy Spirit can do something to a person, can have influence on a person without there being some salvific implication behind that. The Lord opened the jailer's eyes to this young man's ability and responsibility and integrity, and we on and on and on. So I would want to use language more like that, just to avoid the opening the door to, oh, he changed the jailer's heart.
Well, please don't hear me saying that this is a salvation kind of thing.
And I didn't hear you say that. It's just, as we use those words, we have to be careful because those doors will be opened there.
I like the language I would use is, and
it's the language you did use.
Well, I want to be more specific because there's a text in Exodus that I think.
Oh, he's already so demerit.
Well, I'm not going to say what the verse is,
okay.
But I'm just going to say just one little tiny sliver of it.
He's going to get a quarter of a demerit.
Okay. Well, I think God caused the jailer to be favorably disposed to Joseph. That's the language that I would use. Now, did God open his eyes to see Joseph's value? I don't have any issue with that at all. I think that's a very
again, I wasn't disagreeing with you in substance at all. Just
and I agree that it's not like
language.
we're not talking about like God just zap the guy's saved now. My comment
it's a funny
had
image,
nothing to do with
picture.
that. Yeah,
I'm saying
it is good to focus on the language that's used.
Well, it does. The text does say that God gave the favor. So
yes, God gave the favor. Yes,
somehow intervened. And exactly how he did that, it doesn't say. But I was just thinking of something as you were talking. Potiphar put Joseph in charge of his whole household. So Potiphar found Joseph to be very responsible and very able to do the job. So it could be that, and I'm just again speculating, Potiphar may have said something to the jailer like, this guy, up until this point, this guy's been very faithful, very responsible, and
just keep him away from my wife. But otherwise,
as long as he's away from my wife, we're all good.
You have to wonder, because we aren't getting the whole newsflash. We're not getting the whole story here. You got to wonder, like, maybe Potiphar's like, man, I've got to keep my wife happy, but I kind of doubt, like, I got to do what I got to do. So I'm tossing Joseph in jail. But my guess is Potiphar, maybe pure speculation. Maybe Potiphar wasn't as fooled as his wife would want him to be.
It's a very interesting passage in many, many ways. And you're right. We're not getting all the details. So, we could speculate on exactly what this looked like. But the text is being very clear on what it wants us to know. Despite the difficulty, despite the fact that Joseph is now descending even deeper into what I would think is a very uncomfortable situation. First slavery, that seemed like it was going pretty good. Now false accusation, now in jail. Even though he's in authority, he's in authority in a jail. Like, that's not a great place to be. And yet we're told 4 times in this chapter that the Lord was with him. The Lord is causing things to prosper. And that is not how I would typically think of prosperity. So it's an interesting dynamic that's going on here. Those things we can say, I think, with utmost confidence. And then, Greg, I'm with you. I don't know. It would be curious if we could be a fly on the wall, see how Potiphar is like, listen, you got to put this guy in jail, but be nice to him. He's a pretty good guy. Just whatever. Anything else before we read chapter 40?
It's this woman you gave me.
Yeah. Anything else from you guys?
Nope.
Oh, all right. Let's read chapter 40.
Then it came about after these things, the cupbearer and the baker for the king of Egypt offended their lord, the king of Egypt. Pharaoh was furious with his 2 officials, the chief cupbearer and the chief baker. So he put them in confinement in the house of the captain of the bodyguard, in the jail, the same place where Joseph was in prison. The captain of the bodyguard put Joseph in charge of them, and he took care of them. And they were in confinement for some time. Then the cupbearer and the baker for the king of Egypt, who were confined in jail, both had a dream the same night, each man with his own dream, and each dream with its own interpretation. When Joseph came to them in the morning and observed them, behold, they were dejected. He asked Pharaoh's officials who were with him in confinement in his master's house, "Why are your faces so sad today?" Then they said to him, "We have had a dream, and there is no one to interpret it." Then Joseph said to them, "Do not interpretations belong to God? Tell it to me, please." So the chief cupbearer told his dream to Joseph and said to him, "In my dream, behold, there was a vine in front of me, and on the vine were 3 branches. And as it was budding, its blossoms came out, and its clusters produced ripe grapes. Now Pharaoh's cup was in my hand. So I took the grapes and squeezed them into Pharaoh's cup, and I put the cup into Pharaoh's hand." Then Joseph said to him, "This is the interpretation of it. The 3 branches are 3 days. Within 3 more days, Pharaoh will lift up your head and restore you to your office, and you will put Pharaoh's cup into his hand according to your former custom when you were his cupbearer. Only keep me in mind when it goes well with you, and please do me a kindness by mentioning me to Pharaoh and get me out of this house. For I was in fact kidnapped from the land of the Hebrews, and even here I have done nothing that they should have put me into the dungeon." When the chief baker saw that he had interpreted favorably, he said to Joseph, "I also saw in my dream, and behold, there were 3 baskets of white bread on my head, and in the top basket there were some of all sorts of baked food for Pharaoh, and the birds were eating them out of the basket on my head." Then Joseph answered and said, "This is its interpretation. The 3 baskets are 3 days. Within 3 more days Pharaoh will lift up your head from you and will hang you on a tree, and the birds will eat your flesh off you." Thus it came about on the 3rd day, which was Pharaoh's birthday, that he made a feast for all his servants. And he lifted up the head of the chief cupbearer and the head of the chief baker among his servants. He restored the chief cupbearer to his office, and he put the cup into Pharaoh's hand. But he hanged the chief baker, just as Joseph had interpreted to them. Yet the chief cupbearer did not remember Joseph, but forgot him.
All right, chapter 40, we see some more dreams. Joseph says something pretty interesting in verse 8. He says, "Do not interpretations belong to God?" What exactly does that mean? What do you guys think about that?
Well, I see, I guess, 2 different possible meanings. One of them seems more reasonable than the other, but the meaning could be that man can't interpret the symbolism in prophetic dreams without divine revelation. And if you just look at the dreams themselves, I mean, there's just, there are numbers in the dreams. There's the number 3, for example. And the number 3 had a very specific meaning. It meant 3 days. Now, there's just simply no way that you could know with certainty that the number 3 represented 3 days. It's not possible, because 3 days could mean, 3 could mean 3 days, 3 months, 3 years. There's no possible way to know just looking at the face of it. So I think that could mean, God has to tell you that. You cannot possibly know that. I lean toward that interpretation. Or it could mean that if someone can't interpret a dream, God always can, so you can always go to him. But I lean more toward the former. There may be some exceptions. Not all dreams are exactly the same kind. Some dreams are more symbolic. Other dreams maybe just more straightforward, like this is what's going to happen in the future, and it's maybe even just a vision of a literal event. So I think in this case, though, because it's the dream is symbolic, I tend to think that only God could know what the symbolism is, because he's the one that's giving that. That's more or less the way I take it.
Yeah, I think I agree with everything you said. If I were to rephrase that, I would say that what Joseph is acknowledging here is that God is just as sovereign over what the dream means as the imagery that he used. So he is sovereign over the interpretation, just as he is sovereign over the imagery and the visuals or whatever it is that he's received. And drawing a modern day application to this outside of dreams and visions is why I'm so concerned as I hear men like Jordan Peterson, for example. Smart dude, but if you've ever spent 5 minutes listening to him interpret the Bible, you'd run away screaming like your hair's on fire and your backside's catching. Like, it's dangerous what he's doing with the text. And so, yeah, I want to be very careful and acknowledge up front that everything that we're doing here, not just, this isn't just Jordan Peterson, everything we're doing here needs to be guided by and provided for by the Holy Spirit. Otherwise, we're going to end up, Lord knows where.
Even though it seems like he has the ability, because he seems to consistently do it, he's just like he was careful in saying, how can I sin against God and do this thing? He's also careful in saying, if I have this ability, it comes from the Lord. And so we see his constant desire to really go back to sin is against God, giftings are from God. We see that Joseph really has God at the forefront of his mind, and he understands there's something bigger going on here. It's not just, somebody ate spicy food and they thought some strange things, or they were really thinking about a work presentation. And I slept and I was doing my presentation, but my shirt was on backwards. What does it mean? Those interpretations are far less significant than God proclaiming the future before it happened, with the intention that they would know what it means and then act in accordance with that information.
Yeah, at the risk of, I can't remember if I've said this before or not, but I've actually, as part of this project, I am writing down and recording every instance of dreams and visions. I think we can make an argument, and I will make the argument that dreams and visions are connected in a foundational way or an important way. And so how we handle dreams and visions in the Old Testament, I think, ought to inform how we handle dreams or visions as we see them presented to us in the New Testament. And so just going to make that point, and I don't think say anything more.
I want to make one point about the kind of dreams these guys had, because notice the context. These were not just any kind of dreams. These were dreams that gave Joseph the opportunity to interpret them. Had God just given a straightforward dream that just told them explicitly what was going to happen in the future, Joseph would not have had the opportunity to interpret the dream and then be brought before Pharaoh. So it was like, God wasn't just giving dreams, but he was giving a particular kind that helped Joseph rise to power. So I just find it interesting that the dreams were the way that they were for Joseph's benefit.
I wish we saw more. We talk about, some dreams are just your subconscious, or some dreams are just too much pizza. And on the face, I go, yeah, I completely agree with that. I wish we saw examples of dreams that didn't have importance in the Bible, so that we could so easily write off the dreams that are just, I've just been thinking about, whenever I start a new job, I will, not that it happens a lot, but every 10 years or so, I start at a new company, and I will have intense dreams about that job for 3 or 4 weeks. And then I just get used to it. I get comfortable. And so I completely assign that to anxiety and, focus on learning this new thing. And I give it no prophetic importance whatsoever. I just wish we had examples of that we, dreams we could just write off very easily.
Do you think, and this is a genuine question, and I'm simply speculating, but because of our own human experience, we know people dream all the time. Some people don't remember their dreams. I don't remember a lot of my dreams. So if I remember a dream, that's instantly more significant to me. I'm one of those people that I wake up and I don't remember most of the dreams that I had. I do remember some of them, but not most of them. Some people remember all their dreams. Some of my children, they tell me about, they have like 4 or 5 dreams that they remember every single night. But the fact that we don't get dreams recorded constantly seems that most of them are insignificant. Like all of a sudden the details are focusing us. These ones are significant. And, much like in most of your life, you discount most of the dreams that you have. I don't know if you've ever had, if you've told me about it, I've forgotten. I don't know if you've ever had something that you thought had more weight than just simply, this is anxiety or this is what I was thinking about. I only have had one dream that I can recall in my entire life that when I woke from it, I remembered it so specifically, and I knew it was something different in my particular life. And you guys know I'm not overly charismatic. I'm not a big, participant in the dreams and visions kind of thing. But I do believe that the Lord gave me a dream, and I knew exactly what it meant. Similar to this, like I wasn't wondering about it. I knew exactly what it meant. It was, I believe an intense answer to prayer, and I was thankful for it. I've never had a dream like that before, and at least in my experience, which shouldn't, necessarily influence you unduly or anything, but in my experience, that one stood out as saying, that was something different. I've never had anything like it before or after, and quite frankly, I'm not even sure I would want it again. It was very different. These guys, as they were both distraught, so something I mean, they're already in jail, but they're distraught about this dream. Something is, I don't know, weightier about it that all of a sudden it makes its way into the narrative. So I don't know if that is an answer to your question, but my I guess I'll rephrase it. The fact that we don't get page after page after page of everybody's having dreams all the time, we just get these specific ones, seems to mean that they do stand out from the typical dreams that people just have regularly as a more normal part of human life.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. My only disappointment or what I'm asking for is a less subjective way. Like you say you had this dream and it was different and you knew. Great. Yeah. I amen to all that. But different how? Different
right.
Based upon what? Complete subjective. Yeah. And so
it's like when they say, you know, when you meet the woman you want to marry or whatever, you'll just know. And you're like, okay, well, what is that? Can you just, like, will she be what color shoes will she be wearing or something like, you know? But there is, I don't think that we can discount all subjective experience. Like there are certain things that they just stand out. And you're like, this is more significant than other things.
And I'm not saying we should. I'm just saying, man, would I really like to get a little bit more guidance, turning that subjective, giving me some measuring stick.
Yes.
So.
Well, you know, based on the surveying this in the scripture, it seems like every time someone had a dream from God, they always knew without a doubt it was from God. Never questioned it.
We only know that because that's what we've been given. But there's we get a finite number of data points, and to the best of my recollection, all of those data points always point towards God as their source. I'm just saying there's a whole lot of data points out there that we don't know how to measure the difference between. And I would like to have more. So,
but I think what Joe said about like you just know. I mean, I know Joe's answer was really lame.
It's not lame.
But honestly, no. But in all seriousness,
compared to everything else he says, that wasn't lame at all.
but in all seriousness, I think he's right. I think honestly, it's just like when you have a dream from God, it's just you just know that it was, and I know that's subjective because you're having this experience, and it's like, you know. You just know.
And here's the thing is that dream for me, I know it was, but it might not convince you guys because, you know, and since you guys know me, maybe you'll take my word on it. But anybody else watching this, they might be like, yeah, give me a break. Yeah, right.
I've had people in my life who've had dreams and they say, I know this was a dream from God. They relay the dream to me and then they tell me what it means. And in all honesty, I go, I think you're interpreting that dream wrong. Whether it's from God or not, I don't know. But I believe that dream. So I just don't like subjective. Sure. As we're talking about, you know, what has God said or what is God saying? I'm just a naturally more, I'm more timid when it comes to God is communicating this to me via a dream. I would just love a measuring stick.
Greg, I would love that objective criteria. I hear these things like someone had a dream, and they tell me about it. I'm like, I don't know. I guess the most objective criteria that I can have is I can listen to what you say that it means, and then I can evaluate with you, does it actually happen exactly as you said or not? And I've had other people speak prophetic things over me that sounded real good, and I had hoped at the time that maybe they were from the Lord, and they didn't happen. And now I look back and go, those were not from the Lord. And this vision that someone had was not from the Lord. And this dream that they said they was from the Lord, it wasn't. You know how you know? It didn't come to pass. That's the most objective criteria that I can get, but that's always hindsight. That's not really foresight. We have hindsight knowing that this was from the Lord because it happened, and it tells us that it happened. But those guys sitting there probably waiting for the next 3 days, that was probably a pretty anxious anticipatory period as they were kind of waiting to see. And I think one of those guys was sure hoping, I hope you're wrong about this because I don't like the interpretation of this dream. You guys got anything else to add on this before we...
No, not without going beyond the text. No.
Let's read chapter 41.
Now it happened at the end of 2 full years that Pharaoh had a dream, and behold, he was standing by the Nile. And lo, from the Nile there came up 7 cows, sleek and fat, and they grazed in the marsh grass. Then behold, 7 other cows came up after them from the Nile, ugly and gaunt, and they stood by the other cows on the bank of the Nile. The ugly and gaunt cows ate up the 7 sleek and fat cows. Then Pharaoh awoke. He fell asleep and dreamed a second time. And behold, 7 ears of grain came up on a single stalk, plump and good. Then behold, 7 ears, thin and scorched by the east wind, sprouted up after them. The thin ears swallowed up the 7 plump and full ears. Then Pharaoh awoke, and behold, it was a dream. Now in the morning his spirit was troubled, so he sent and called for all the magicians of Egypt and all its wise men. And Pharaoh told them his dreams, but there was no one who could interpret them to Pharaoh. Then the chief cupbearer spoke to Pharaoh, saying, I would make mention today of my own offenses. Pharaoh was furious with his servants, and he put me in confinement in the house of the captain of the bodyguard, both me and the chief baker. We had a dream on the same night, he and I. Each of us dreamed according to the interpretation of his own dream. Now a Hebrew youth was with us there, a servant of the captain of the bodyguard, and we related them to him, and he interpreted our dreams for us. To each one he interpreted according to his own dream. And just as he interpreted for us, so it happened. He restored me in my office, but he hanged him. Then Pharaoh sent and called for Joseph, and they hurriedly brought him out of the dungeon. And when he had shaved himself and changed his clothes, he came to Pharaoh. Pharaoh said to Joseph, I have had a dream, but no one can interpret it. And I have heard it said about you, that when you hear a dream, you can interpret it. Joseph then answered Pharaoh, saying, It is not in me. God will give Pharaoh a favorable answer. So Pharaoh spoke to Joseph. In my dream, behold, I was standing on the bank of the Nile, and behold, 7 cows, fat and sleek, came up out of the Nile, and they grazed in the marsh grass. Lo, 7 other cows came up after them, poor and very ugly and gaunt, such as I had never seen for ugliness in all the land of Egypt. And the lean and ugly cows ate up the first 7 fat cows. Yet when they had devoured them, it could not be detected that they had devoured them, for they were just as ugly as before. Then I awoke. I saw also in my dream, and behold, 7 ears, full and good, came up on a single stalk. And lo, 7 ears, withered, thin, and scorched by the east wind, sprouted up after them, and the thin ears swallowed the 7 good ears. Then I told it to the magicians, but there was no one who could explain it to me. Now Joseph said to Pharaoh, Pharaoh's dreams are one and the same. God has told to Pharaoh what he is about to do. The 7 good cows are 7 years, and the 7 good ears are 7 years. The dreams are one and the same. The 7 lean and ugly cows that came up after them are 7 years, and the 7 thin ears scorched by the east wind will be 7 years of famine. It is as I have spoken to Pharaoh. God has shown to Pharaoh what he is about to do. Behold, 7 years of great abundance are coming in all the land of Egypt, and after them 7 years of famine will come, and all the abundance will be forgotten in the land of Egypt, and the famine will ravage the land. So the abundance will be unknown in the land because of that subsequent famine, for it will be very severe. Now as for the repeating of the dream to Pharaoh twice, it means that the matter is determined by God, and God will quickly bring it about. Now let Pharaoh look for a man discerning and wise, and set him over the land of Egypt. Let Pharaoh take action to appoint overseers in charge of the land, and let him exact 1/5 of the produce of the land of Egypt in the 7 years of abundance. Then let them gather all the food of these good years that are coming, and store up the grain for food in the cities under Pharaoh's authority, and let them guard it. Let the food become as a reserve for the land for the 7 years of famine, which will occur in the land of Egypt, so that the land will not perish during the famine. Now the proposal seemed good to Pharaoh and to all his servants. Then Pharaoh said to his servants, Can we find a man like this, in whom is a divine spirit? So Pharaoh said to Joseph, Since God has informed you of all this, there is no one so discerning and wise as you are. You shall be over my house, and according to your command all my people shall do homage. Only in the throne I will be greater than you. Pharaoh said to Joseph, See, I have set you over all the land of Egypt. Then Pharaoh took off his signet ring from his hand, and put it on Joseph's hand, and clothed him in garments of fine linen, and put the gold necklace around his neck. He had him ride in his second chariot, and they proclaimed before him, Bow the knee, and he set him over all the land of Egypt. Moreover, Pharaoh said to Joseph, Though I am Pharaoh, yet without your permission no one shall raise his hand or foot in all the land of Egypt. Then Pharaoh named Joseph Zaphanath-Paneah, and he gave him Asenath, the daughter of Potiphera, priest of On, as his wife. And Joseph went forth over the land of Egypt. Now Joseph was 30 years old when he stood before Pharaoh, king of Egypt. And Joseph went out from the presence of Pharaoh and went through all the land of Egypt. During the 7 years of plenty the land brought forth abundantly. So he gathered all the food of these 7 years which occurred in the land of Egypt, and placed the food in the cities. He placed in every city the food from its own surrounding fields. Thus Joseph stored up grain in great abundance, like the sand of the sea, until he stopped measuring it, for it was beyond measure. Now before the year of famine came, 2 sons were born to Joseph, whom Asenath, the daughter of Potiphera, priest of On, bore to him. Joseph named the firstborn Manasseh, for he said, God has made me forget all my trouble and all my father's household. He named the second Ephraim, for, he said, God has made me fruitful in the land of my affliction. When the 7 years of plenty, which had been in the land of Egypt, came to an end, and the 7 years of famine began to come, just as Joseph had said, then there was famine in all the lands. But in all the land of Egypt there was bread. So when all the land of Egypt was famished, the people cried out to Pharaoh for bread. And Pharaoh said to all the Egyptians, Go to Joseph. Whatever he says to you, you shall do. When the famine was spread over all the face of the earth, then Joseph opened all the storehouses and sold to the Egyptians. and the famine was severe in the land of Egypt. The people of all the earth came to Egypt to buy grain from Joseph, because the famine was severe in all the earth.
All right, well, this chapter opens. It tells us that 2 full years pass. So, again, it's very easy for us to read that. But 2 more years of Joseph continuing on in prison. But then we read something in verse 32 that's fairly interesting. What does verse 32 of chapter 41 tell us about prophetic dreams?
In Genesis 41, verse 32, it says, "Now as for the repeating of the dream to Pharaoh twice, it means that the matter is determined by God, and God will quickly bring it about." So he says the repeating of a dream, if you have a dream twice, it means that it's settled. The matter is determined by God. It will surely happen. And not only will it surely happen, but it'll happen relatively quickly. So this, as I read this seems to imply that some dreams reveal certainties, while others may only reveal possibilities. Because if he says that this dream, Pharaoh had 2 dreams, and if you read the chapter, you know that they were basically like, they were different dreams, but they were talking about the same thing. So it's the same event is in view. And he says, okay, the fact that you had this dream twice, it means that this is going to happen, nothing can change it. But if that's the case, then wouldn't that open the door for the idea that if you have one dream, one prophetic dream, it might be, and I use the word prophetic maybe a little bit too loosely there, but it could mean that like a dream might only be saying, okay, this is a possibility. Sometimes maybe God would send someone a dream as a warning to get them to avoid, arriving at a certain, place or something like that. So I think some dreams may serve as warnings by revealing possible futures that could happen because of disobedience, while other dreams reveal certainties. So that's kind of the that's the impression that I get as I'm reading this.
I hear you, and I say maybe, perhaps, right? Like I don't want to build too much theology, some house of cards, or I don't know, house of straw, whatever it may be. I don't want to build too much on this comment. Now, I want to recognize that according to Joseph, according to Scripture, the repetition of this dream meant that it was certain. Should we then take this statement by Joseph in this instance and make a blanket rule? Maybe we should. I don't know, especially as a guy who, if I've had a prophetic dream, I either A, don't remember it, or B, didn't recognize it. So do I want, I just don't have enough data either in Scripture. I don't know that I'm not particularly remembering anywhere else in the Bible where we get this rule or even get this example. Unless we get it in Revelation. I don't know. But I would not want to take this and build a theological rock solid principle on. I want to admit that here in this instance, that's clearly what it meant. But that's probably as far as I feel comfortable going.
Eric, would you say that the dreams that we just saw in the previous chapter that seemed to only happen once, that those were only possible? Or do you think that, how would the fact that those ones weren't repeated, or at least they weren't told that they were repeated, how would that affect kind of what you're talking about right now? Well,
remember when I talked about single dreams, like if you just have one dream, yeah, that could be a certainty. It's entirely possible that it could be. But I think the point that I was trying to make was that what Joseph seems to be saying, may be saying here, is that if you have two dreams, you don't need to wonder if it's a certainty or not, because it is. That seems to be. I'm certainly not saying that if you have one dream, it's just up for, it may happen, it may not. It's it's not certain. I'm not denying that one dream could represent a certainty. I'm just simply saying that if you have what Joseph seems to be saying is if you have two, it's like God's telling you, do not ignore this. this is going to happen, and you better prepare for it.
If
whatever.
you have one, can you ignore it?
Well, no, but I'm just, if God tells you anything, I don't care if it's through a dream or if it's through a vision or through the Bible, whatever. If God's telling you something, you dare not ignore it. So I guess that's, I'm thinking, and I don't want to jump, I can't jump ahead, but I think there are reasons to believe that sometimes when God tells somebody something, it shouldn't be interpreted as a certainty necessarily. Now, if God knows the future with certainty, but sometimes God will tell somebody something not to tell them what's going to happen, but to tell them what they need to avoid. Like, you can avoid this. If I'm telling you whatever it is, such and such a thing, so that you can do something that will change this outcome. And so I think that God, I see a lot of that elsewhere in Scripture.
We saw that in Genesis, right? I mean, protecting Abimelech from doing anything untoward with Sarah.
There you go.
And Laban, right? I think wasn't it Laban being told not to speak anything good or bad
against Isaac.
Just basically as a warning, like, hey, what you're about to do, just tread very carefully, because if you do that, this isn't going to go well for you.
And I have no problem with anything you laid out there. My only hesitation is not to make a rule that says that this verse establishes a blanket principle to be applied in every situation where if a dream is repeated, it means this. Maybe that's what it means. I just don't know that.
I'm with you, Greg. I'm more comfortable with the position that you're saying, and maybe it is as strong as a rule, but I'm more comfortable just saying, okay, this interpretation of this one, he has this dream, he kind of is disturbed by it. He has this dream again, different figures, but the same meaning. And, Joseph then says, well, this is certainly going to happen. The dreams are one and the same. They mean the same thing.
Since we've all, except only Joe, both of us have already earned demerits, so let's earn some more. Can either of you guys think of another situation biblically?
He wants you to do it, by the way, Eric.
No,
he really wants
I've already said I can't
me?
No. Well, yeah. Can you think of another instance where a dream or vision is repeated? I'm just trying to draw some. So,
well, I can think of,
if it is a rule,
it's a rule that we don't 30 times over again, but not. It's not the same kind though. So I guess in a way, I think I'm actually what I'm going to do is I'm going to support what you just said, Greg.
Good man. Because
in the verse, it does say, now as for the repeating of the dream to Pharaoh twice. So it does seem pretty specific here that it's like what you said, and you're probably right about this, could be. It's like when he says, okay, the fact that God revealed this dream to you, Pharaoh, twice, that means for you, this is certain. So it's not necessarily a hard and fast rule for every single dream experience. So I would say that there's, based on what the text says, I think there's, there's some reason to believe that you may very well be right about that. This may be it may be specific and not, not a rule that could be applied, to every single
I just
situation.
Maybe Joseph was drawing upon some deep and profound systematic that he said, Rule 13b on interpretation of dreams.
Is there a prophetic dreams interpreting manifesto?
Exactly. Maybe there is. But I just, as I get it, or as I read the text, I go, maybe that's a true thing. And I'm perfectly okay with that. But maybe this is just sorry, go ahead.
No, I cut you off.
No, go ahead, please.
Well, I would think, repetition on its own is emphasizing something, and so that, whether we're talking about prophetic dreams or anything else, if God's, just like we talked about in Genesis 39 with repeating this phrase, the Lord was with him, the Lord was with him, that repetition is drawing your attention to something. And so while it might be, you have a dream that maybe you have it and you're like, oh, was this significant or not? If you have something similar, it really is driving it home. The only other thing that I can think of is, and I'm, okay, I'll take the demerit. It's not a dream; it's the vision that Peter gets of the sheet coming down.
Yeah.
That's repeated,
yep.
And he was, arguing with the Lord about that. And so he kind of needed it over and over again. I think that was 3 times, right?
Yeah, good reference.
So that's the only one that comes to mind with thinking about this. But repetition, I think, is something that, some of our modern translations even, because the modern reader doesn't like repetition, sometimes translates it out. Like there'll be repeated phrases that the translators will be like, okay, we got the point. We'll just kind of leave this part out. I wish they wouldn't do that. I wish they would always give us the repetition. Or we also sometimes don't like when the same word is used. Like we like a little variety and spice, so they'll translate the same word in a different related word. And I wish they wouldn't do that either. I wish that, if we're getting a repeated Hebrew word or a repeated Greek word, just keep giving us the repetition.
It was funny because I was teaching from Jude this weekend, and kind of in the middle of Jude, not a long book, by the way. Ungodly people and their ungodliness do ungodly, this, I think 4 times, ungodly, all kind of within the same breath. That ought to...
we get it. These are ungodly.
I wonder if they're ungodly.
Yeah.
So is this a rule? Yeah. Maybe, man. I don't want to be the guy that writes the manual on interpreting dreams. If they're,
you might sell more of that than your first book, though.
Probably would. That's a great. I gotta go, guys. I have something important to do.
Greg's got a project to work on.
I think I sold 1 copy this year. I probably sold way more than that.
Hey, that's one. And your mom is going to be happy when she reads that.
Oh, so. Ouch.
but I just want to say, like, this doesn't completely apply. First thing I want to say is this. Remember, I'm not saying I'm like settled on this. Like if it's twice for sure, like don't ever question it. Like, okay, I'm saying maybe that's the case. It could be argued, like, in the book of Daniel, there are certain events that are repeat. Like it's not necessarily giving the same exact thing over and over again, but it's like a repetition of certain events. So I don't know. I mean, yeah. And those things did happen.
Another 1/3 of demerit is given to Eric.
I think you're probably right. I guess all I was trying to really do is avoid the writing of the handbook.
And I absolutely sympathize with that, because I don't want to be coming up with rules. We're like, okay, guys, this is a rule. You cannot ever break this rule. This always applies. I mean, you rarely can you do that.
Let's move on to the next issue. As a result of interpreting this, Pharaoh takes this very seriously, and Joseph is made ruler over Egypt, basically just under Pharaoh himself. What's the significance of this promotion that Joseph receives?
Did you want to go first, Greg? Or
no,
did you want me
after you, brother. Please.
Okay.
That way I can correct you.
Appreciate that. Need some accountability. Joseph's promotion to ruler of Egypt is, I think, setting the stage for the fulfillment of his dreams in Genesis 37. Now, remember, Joseph said that the repeating of a dream means that the matter is determined by God. Well, this is pretty embarrassing, but Joseph's dream happened twice. And we were thinking about, I can't come up with anything. Well, just a few chapters earlier, there's another example of this.
Fair enough. Well played, sir.
Nice. Joseph had 2 dreams, and they both had the same meaning. And as we keep reading in this book, everything happened according to those dreams. So this is kind of setting the stage for the fulfillment of Joseph's dreams, and this is the part of the story that just gets really exciting, because all the misery that Joseph went through, he turns a corner and he gets promoted, and what a just an awesome turn of events that was just totally not unexpected because of his dreams, but I'm sure when Joseph had this happen, it was like, wow, this is like a world-shattering kind of thing. So I'm happy for Joseph in this story.
It's funny. Again, well played on the repetition of the dreams there. Us not being able to think of it as we just handled that text a couple weeks ago. I don't know that I would have ever hearing someone tell me of a dream or vision where sheaves of wheat are bowing down and stars are bowing. Like, I don't know that I would have ever thought this is how that would be fulfilled. So the interpretation to the manifestation, the dream to the manifestation, if you'd asked me to interpret it literally, I would never have gotten here. But yeah, how important this, I think every step in this was important. Every step of it was necessary. But surely this is kind of the final door that needed to be need to be gone through in order to fulfill what God had intended, and that is the bringing of, well, I don't know, go ahead. We'll see that next week, perhaps.
Well, the elements are beginning to fall in place, but there are some elements of that dream that have still not happened. But it's starting to become pretty clear how it could be that they would bow down to him. In 41:46, it says that he was 30 years old at this point. If we remember back to how old Joseph was when he had that dream before, he was 17 years old. So we're talking about 13 years. So we forgot about that dream temporarily, even though we just talked about it a few weeks ago. So you can imagine that maybe this wasn't at the top of mind anymore. Perhaps it was for him. The text doesn't necessarily tell us, but 13 years is a long time. I know that some people, when you think about God's favor and God's presence and the blessing and the prosperity, at this point, all of a sudden, okay, second in command in Egypt. That's a pretty big promotion. This is a pretty luxurious spot to be in. But for those who kind of downplay the agony and difficulty of the 13 years leading to this point, what do you guys draw from the conclusion of what Joseph named his sons in verses 50 to 52? We get this explanation of kind of how Joseph viewed the last 13 years. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think it's funny that we often miss this, right? Like we think of being second in command, and but according to what he names his children, the land of my afflictions. Now, again, a lot of time happens. He spends time as a slave, and it didn't seem all that bad, but yet Potiphar's wife ruined that, and he spends time as a prisoner, but it doesn't seem all that. We don't get the dregs of that, and now he's made second in command of Egypt, and that seems pretty great as far as I can tell. But from his perspective, God has made me fruitful in the land of my affliction, verse 52. He sees this as an affliction, which is interesting.
Yeah, I love in verse 51, Joseph named the firstborn Manasseh, for he said, God has made me forget all my trouble and all my father's household. I like, it's like the blessing was so big that he just forgot about all that he had gone through. Like the blessing dwarfed the trouble. And I really like the way that that's worded. And as Greg already said, he made me fruitful in the land of my affliction, a situation that should have robbed him of everything, and for a time it did, actually brought even greater prosperity than had he remained at his father's house. So it's interesting that God just completely turned everything around. And this happened like in a moment. Like he went 13 years of misery, and then it's like he interprets Pharaoh's dreams, and Pharaoh's like, let's put this guy in charge of everything. Like right, just like that. It was just awesome.
Well, going back to the previous chapter, when he was interpreting the dream from the cupbearer and the baker, he said to them that he had been, kidnapped from the land of the Hebrews. Eric, you had wrote that, and I didn't read that part of the question, but that was a good observation that you made. And then he was forgotten for 2 more years. So even as recently as 2 years ago, he was still thinking about his affliction, and he was still thinking about all the circumstances that brought him up there. I imagine he didn't forget that when they forgot him for 2 more years. And then, yes, in an instant, things are turned around. And yet I would urge anybody who, especially if you're kind of in that prosperity mindset, to think that means that everything will always turn around in an instant for you. That's possible, it might. But there might also be more than a decade of difficulties. And that doesn't mean that God is displeased necessarily, but God's goodness, it seems to me that Joseph was still trusting in the Lord all along the way with those little phrases, like interpretations come from the Lord. God will give you an interpretation of this dream. He didn't lose his faith, but this wasn't an easy season.
Before the final fulfillment, what we have at least 7 years, possibly 9 years. So, the 7 years of plenty hadn't happened yet, so the 7 years of plenty, and then his brothers go down in the midst of the famine, and so it's not even, it's about halfway fulfilled.
Right. We're getting close to 3 decades of working these details out, and so it's good to remember that God is able to be faithful over generations, over centuries, millennia. We're kind of, you're right, getting to almost the midpoint of the fulfillment, which is pretty interesting. Last thing that we have for our discussion and kind of how he's going to bring out the rest of this, Greg, you kind of gave us a good segue into that. Verses 53 to 57 describe the 7 years of famine that are going to come after these 7 years of plenty. It sure sounds like the language is telling us that this is going to affect the entire earth. We talked about some of this with the flood. Sometimes people go, well, was it the whole earth that was being flooded, or was it just a regional thing? Now this whole famine, like, was this the known earth to them, or was this actually the whole earth? How do you guys read this last part? The whole world affected, just a regional affect? What do you think?
I guess I don't know, right? It's a big earth, as it turns out. And so was this absolutely every last continent upon the globe? Perhaps it was. I guess if that is what it's saying, great. But I think what's important to the story is everywhere within the scope of their travel, everywhere within, they, once we see the brothers starting to look for food, that there's no food to the east, there's no food to the north, we have to go to Egypt for food. And so whether it's global or regional, I think what the story communicates is this was their only resource.
Yeah, I don't take it to mean the entire earth, literally. I think this is just a way of saying, it affected, of course, the land of Egypt and in the neighboring nations, the nations in that area around, around the Mediterranean. And I think it was more of I'll say a local. I do believe the Genesis flood I think that was global. I think though this is a different situation here. I mean, I don't think people were sailing from South America, to get there or other places. I think the context makes it sound like it was just, the land of Egypt, the surrounding area. It affected those places and not the entire globe.
I'd say, like, again, could it be? I suppose it could be. When we were reading the flood narrative is communicating something. It's communicating that everything was destroyed. Here, what is this communicating? Now, verse 56, the famine was spread over the face of the earth, or over all the face of the earth. Could they be trying to communicate every last square inch of the globe? Perhaps. But I think at the very least, what's important is there was no place for anyone to go except Egypt in that region. And so I don't want to discount that it's possible. I just don't think that's the point that the authors are trying to make.
As you read this just on its surface, it certainly does to me seem to indicate that it's, again, this isn't just a cultic deity doing something in a cultic area. This does seem to be a bigger scope to me. Like I do think it's the whole earth, but I would agree fully with what Eric said. I don't think boats were coming from South America to come and try and get bread from Egypt as a result of this. And they won't make it into the picture. Like, we'll see who it is that actually comes to Egypt. And it's not, Native Americans or something. It's the groups that are surrounding the Egypt in that particular landmass. So I don't have anything beyond that. So do you guys got anything else before we conclude our discussion on Genesis 39 through 41?
I think I'm all set.
I think we've covered it.
I think we covered it. So if you're still with us, thanks for hanging out. You've heard what we think. We'd love to hear what you think down in the comments section below. If you agree with us or disagree with us, or if you have other observations you'd like to make or other questions you'd like to ask, we'd love to see you leave those down in the comments section below. If you enjoyed the video, click the thumbs up button and let YouTube know that you liked the video. And until we see you again, get equipped, obey your King, and glorify your God.
I gotta go, guys. I have something important to do.